Marcus Chen had always been smaller than the other guards. Standing barely 5 feet 6 inches in his polished boots, he looked almost comical next to the towering figures who served alongside him in the royal protection detail. The ornate red and gold uniform that fit perfectly on his colleagues seemed to swallow his slight frame, making him appear more like a child playing dress-up than a professional guardian of the crown. Every morning at 6 sharp, Marcus would arrive at Kensington Palace 45 minutes before his shift began. He used this time to inspect his equipment with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. His sidearm, a standard-issue Glock 19, received a complete field strip and cleaning every other day. His radio equipment underwent daily battery checks and frequency tests. The small notebook he carried contained detailed observations about suspicious individuals, unusual patterns in visitor behavior, and potential security vulnerabilities he noticed during his rounds. His fellow guards found his meticulous preparation amusing at best, irritating at worst. Detective Sergeant James Morrison, a former Metropolitan Police officer who stood 6 feet 4 inches and weighed 230 pounds, often made jokes about Marcus's size and dedication. "Look at little Chen," Morrison would announce to anyone within earshot. "Still playing with his toy gun like he's going to save the Queen single-handedly." The other guards would chuckle, some more maliciously than others. Sarah Williams, one of the few female guards in the unit, usually remained silent during these episodes, but even she seemed to view Marcus as more of a mascot than a colleague. Captain Reynolds, their commanding officer, tolerated Marcus because of his perfect attendance record and spotless disciplinary file, but clearly had no intention of assigning him to any meaningful duties. Marcus's daily assignments reflected his status as the unit's least respected member. While Morrison and the senior guards accompanied the royal family on public engagements and foreign trips, Marcus found himself stationed at the palace's service entrances, monitoring delivery trucks and maintenance workers. He spent countless hours checking the identification of cleaning staff, kitchen personnel, and gardeners who entered and exited the palace grounds. These assignments, which others viewed as punishment duty, became Marcus's graduate school in security work. He memorized the faces and schedules of every regular worker who accessed the palace. He noted which delivery companies arrived on specific days, what vehicles they drove, and which drivers worked different routes. The small notebook he carried everywhere filled with observations that would have impressed seasoned intelligence analysts. During his lunch breaks, while other guards gathered in the common room to discuss football matches and weekend plans, Marcus studied. He had enrolled in online courses in threat assessment, behavioral analysis, and emergency response procedures. His modest apartment contained textbooks on protective intelligence, presidential security protocols from the Secret Service, and technical manuals on surveillance equipment. The mockery reached its peak during the annual training exercises. Each year, the Royal Protection Detail conducted simulated attack scenarios to test their response procedures. These exercises involved actors playing terrorists, assassins, or disturbed individuals attempting to breach palace security or threaten members of the royal family. During the previous year's exercise, Marcus had been assigned to perimeter observation, which essentially meant standing in a corner and watching while the real guards demonstrated their tactical skills. Morrison had made a show of explaining the assignment to him in front of the entire unit. "Chen, your job is to stand here and look intimidating," he had said, drawing laughs from the assembled guards. "Think you can handle that, or should we get you a step ladder?" The comment stung not because it was particularly clever, but because it reflected the fundamental disrespect his colleagues felt for him. Marcus had joined the Royal Protection Detail with genuine enthusiasm and dedication. He believed deeply in the importance of protecting the constitutional monarchy and the individuals who embodied it. While his colleagues saw their positions as prestigious jobs with good benefits, Marcus viewed his role as a sacred duty. This difference in perspective became apparent during routine interactions with the royal family members. When Prince William visited the palace for official business, most guards maintained the required professional distance while internally calculating whether they might get selected for his next overseas trip. Marcus, however, studied the prince's patterns, mannerisms, and potential vulnerabilities with the intensity of a devoted bodyguard. He noticed that Prince William often became distracted by his mobile phone while walking through corridors. He observed that the prince preferred to take a specific route to his father's office, passing through areas that offered multiple concealment opportunities for potential threats. He noted that Prince William's security detail often relaxed their vigilance when moving through areas they considered secure, creating windows of vulnerability that a determined attacker could exploit. Marcus documented all these observations in his notebook, along with his recommendations for improved security protocols. He had attempted to share these insights with Captain Reynolds on several occasions, but was told that his observations were noted and then dismissed without serious consideration. The dismissive treatment extended beyond professional interactions. During the traditional Christmas party for palace staff, Marcus sat alone at a table near the back of the room while his colleagues clustered around the bar, sharing stories about their heroic actions during various assignments. Morrison held court with tales of his days with the Metropolitan Police, while others contributed their own stories of detecting threats and protecting VIPs. Marcus knew that his own experiences wouldn't interest his colleagues. His greatest professional achievements involved preventing minor security breaches that were so subtle most people wouldn't have noticed them. He had once identified a maintenance worker whose credentials didn't match the company's standard format, leading to the discovery that the individual was actually a journalist attempting to gain unauthorized access. Another time, he had noticed unusual behavior from a delivery driver and discovered that the man was conducting surveillance for a planned protest, not an attack, but surveillance nonetheless. These victories seemed insignificant compared to Morrison's stories about wrestling armed suspects to the ground or Williams's account of spotting a knife-wielding attacker during a royal engagement. Marcus's contributions to security were like those of a good immune system, preventing problems before they became visible rather than dramatically responding to obvious threats. The professional isolation took its emotional toll. Marcus had joined the Royal Protection Detail after serving 6 years in the British Army, where his small stature had also made him a target for jokes, but where his skills had eventually earned him respect. In the Army, results mattered more than appearance. A soldier who could hit targets consistently and complete missions successfully gained acceptance regardless of physical characteristics. The palace environment operated differently. Appearance, presence, and social connections seemed to matter more than competence. Guards who looked impressive standing next to members of the royal family received the choice assignments, while guards who might actually be more effective at preventing threats found themselves relegated to background roles. Marcus's army experience had taught him patience and persistence. His commanding officer in Afghanistan, Colonel Patricia Hayes, had once told him that the most dangerous enemy was the one you underestimated. "People will judge you by your size and your appearance," she had said. "Let them. While they're making assumptions about what you can't do, you'll be accomplishing things they can't imagine." This advice sustained Marcus through the daily indignities of his palace assignment. Every morning, as he endured Morrison's jokes and Captain Reynolds's indifferent glances, he reminded himself that his purpose was protecting the royal family, not impressing his colleagues. Their opinions mattered far less than his ability to detect and prevent genuine threats. The irony was that his colleagues' dismissive attitude created an advantage for Marcus. Because they didn't take him seriously, they didn't bother to hide their own shortcuts and lapses in protocol. Marcus observed that Morrison often skipped portions of his security rounds when he thought no one was watching. He noticed that Williams spent significant time on personal phone calls during duty hours. He documented instances where other guards allowed unauthorized individuals into restricted areas because they were too embarrassed to ask for identification from people who appeared wealthy or important. Marcus compiled this information not to report his colleagues, but to understand the genuine vulnerabilities in palace security. He recognized that the greatest threats often exploited human weaknesses rather than technological failures. A terrorist organization planning an attack would study the guards' behavior just as carefully as they studied the physical layout of the building. His notebook contained detailed profiles of his fellow guards, noting their strengths, weaknesses, and predictable patterns. Morrison was physically imposing and genuinely brave, but tended to become overconfident in familiar situations. Williams was observant and analytical, but sometimes became distracted by personal concerns. Captain Reynolds was experienced and knowledgeable, but relied too heavily on established procedures and struggled to adapt to unexpected situations. Understanding his colleagues' limitations helped Marcus identify areas where his own skills might prove valuable. He began positioning himself strategically during shift changes and break periods, covering areas that might be neglected when the primary guards were absent or distracted. These self-assigned duties required Marcus to work longer hours than his colleagues, but he viewed this as professional development rather than exploitation. Every extra hour spent studying palace security procedures, observing visitor patterns, and analyzing potential threats made him more effective at his primary mission. The extra effort also helped Marcus develop relationships with palace staff members who worked outside the security department. The kitchen workers, cleaning crews, and maintenance teams began to recognize him as the guard who actually paid attention to their concerns and treated them with respect. Unlike his colleagues, who often viewed support staff as potential security risks to be monitored, Marcus understood that these individuals could serve as valuable sources of intelligence about unusual activities or concerning behavior. Maria Santos, the head housekeeper, began sharing information with Marcus about visitors who seemed to be paying unusual attention to palace layouts or asking inappropriate questions about security procedures. James Mitchell, the head gardener, mentioned when he noticed unfamiliar individuals photographing the palace grounds or attempting to measure distances between buildings and potential escape routes. This network of informal contacts provided Marcus with intelligence that never reached his colleagues through official channels. Palace staff members felt comfortable approaching him because he listened to their concerns without dismissing them as paranoid or overly cautious. His reputation as someone who took security seriously, combined with his respectful treatment of all palace employees, gradually made him a trusted figure among the people who knew the building's daily operations most intimately. Marcus's growing knowledge of palace operations revealed security vulnerabilities that worried him deeply. The building's age and historical significance created numerous blind spots and potential concealment areas that would be nearly impossible to monitor effectively. The constant flow of visitors, staff members, and delivery personnel made it extremely difficult to track who belonged in specific areas at particular times. Most concerning to Marcus was his observation that many security procedures relied on assumptions about human behavior that might not hold true during an actual emergency. The evacuation plans assumed that royal family members would follow instructions immediately and move quickly to designated safe areas. The threat response protocols assumed that guards would be able to communicate effectively and coordinate their actions under stress. Marcus knew from his military experience that assumptions about human behavior under stress were often wrong. People panicked, made irrational decisions, and failed to follow familiar procedures when confronted with genuine danger. Effective security planning required accounting for these human factors, not ignoring them. His notebook contained increasingly detailed contingency plans for scenarios that went beyond the standard training exercises. He considered what would happen if multiple attackers struck simultaneously from different directions. He analyzed how the security team would respond if their communication systems were jammed or compromised. He studied what evacuation routes would remain viable if explosives blocked the primary exits. These weren't paranoid fantasies, but practical considerations based on real terrorist tactics and attack methods. Marcus had studied incident reports from security breaches at government buildings, royal residences, and diplomatic facilities around the world. He understood that successful attacks often succeeded because security teams had prepared for the threats they expected rather than the threats they actually faced. The gap between official security procedures and practical reality troubled Marcus, but he had no effective way to address it. His suggestions and observations were consistently dismissed by his superiors, who seemed to view his detailed analysis as evidence of overthinking rather than thoroughness. Captain Reynolds had once told him directly to stop looking for problems that don't exist, after Marcus submitted a memo outlining potential vulnerabilities in the palace's visitor screening procedures. The captain's attitude reflected a broader institutional culture that valued following established protocols over adapting to evolving threats. This institutional resistance to change wasn't unique to the Royal Protection Detail. Marcus had encountered similar attitudes in the Army, where senior officers sometimes rejected new tactics or technologies simply because they differed from traditional approaches. The difference was that in combat situations, reality eventually forced adaptation. Units that failed to evolve didn't survive. Palace security operated in a more forgiving environment where the absence of successful attacks could be interpreted as evidence that existing procedures were adequate. Marcus understood that this logic was dangerously flawed, but he lacked the authority or credibility to challenge it effectively. The autumn of that year brought changes to the palace that most guards barely noticed, but Marcus observed with growing concern. A series of new staff appointments coincided with several unusual incidents that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively suggested a pattern that worried him. The first incident occurred during the morning shift change in early October. Marcus noticed a delivery driver who claimed to be bringing fresh flowers for the state rooms, but whose vehicle displayed magnetic signs rather than the painted company logos that regular suppliers used. The driver's paperwork appeared legitimate, but his behavior struck Marcus as nervous in a way that suggested more than normal anxiety about entering the palace. Marcus approached the driver politely, asking standard questions about the delivery schedule and contents. The man's responses were technically correct, but his body language indicated deception. He avoided direct eye contact, touched his face repeatedly while speaking, and seemed unusually eager to complete his delivery quickly and leave. Following his instincts, Marcus asked to inspect the flower arrangements before they entered the building. The driver became defensive, claiming that opening the containers would damage the delicate blossoms. When Marcus insisted, explaining that security protocols required verification of all deliveries, the driver reluctantly opened several containers. The flowers were genuine, but Marcus noticed that the arrangement bases were unusually heavy and contained metal components that seemed inconsistent with normal floral design. When he questioned this, the driver claimed they were new weighted bases designed to prevent the arrangements from tipping over. Marcus documented the incident in his notebook, including the driver's name, vehicle registration, and company information. He also took photographs of the arrangement bases, noting their construction and materials. His follow-up investigation revealed that the floral company was legitimate, but had recently hired several new drivers whose background checks were less thorough than their previous hearing standards. Captain Reynolds listened to Marcus's report with obvious impatience, concluding that the incident was resolved since the flowers were genuine and no actual threat had materialized. He reminded Marcus that his job was to verify deliveries, not to conduct investigations into supplier personnel policies. The dismissive response frustrated Marcus, but didn't surprise him. He had learned to expect that his concerns would be minimized unless they resulted in immediate, obvious threats. The institutional culture prioritized avoiding false alarms over detecting subtle indicators of potential problems. 3 weeks later, Marcus noticed another anomaly during his routine monitoring of service entrances. A new cleaning company had begun providing evening services for several palace areas, and their staff rotation patterns seemed unusual. Most cleaning companies assigned the same workers to specific areas consistently, allowing them to become familiar with their assigned spaces and work more efficiently. This company rotated different workers through the same areas on a weekly basis, with newcomers frequently appearing without advance notice. The workers themselves appeared competent and professional, but Marcus noticed that they seemed unusually interested in areas outside their assigned cleaning duties. During one evening shift, Marcus observed a cleaner who claimed to be new to the service photographing architectural details in the state dining room. When Marcus approached him, the man explained that he was documenting the room's condition for quality control purposes. His supervisor, contacted by radio, confirmed this explanation and provided documentation supporting the cleaner's story. Again, Marcus found nothing technically wrong with the situation, but the behavior pattern concerned him. Professional cleaning staff typically focused on their assigned tasks rather than conducting detailed photographic surveys of palace interiors. The explanation was plausible, but the timing seemed coincidental given the earlier flower delivery incident. Marcus expanded his documentation to include detailed observations about all contracted service providers. He noted which companies had recently changed their personnel policies, which staff members appeared to be conducting activities beyond their stated duties, and which supervisors seemed unusually interested in palace security procedures. His growing database revealed patterns that would have been invisible to guards who focused only on their immediate assignments. Several different service companies had recently hired new personnel who demonstrated unusual curiosity about palace operations. Multiple incidents had occurred involving legitimate service providers whose behavior was slightly outside normal patterns. Individually, each incident was easily explained and appeared harmless. Collectively, they suggested the possibility that someone was conducting systematic intelligence gathering using multiple approaches and different types of access to palace facilities. Marcus shared his analysis with Captain Reynolds during their monthly review meeting. He presented his documentation methodically, explaining the patterns he had observed and the potential security implications. He recommended conducting more thorough background checks on all service provider personnel and implementing additional monitoring procedures for areas where contracted workers operated without direct supervision. Captain Reynolds reviewed the materials with obvious skepticism. He acknowledged that Marcus's documentation was thorough, but questioned whether the observed patterns actually indicated any genuine threat. "You're seeing connections that might not exist," he told Marcus. "Intelligence analysis is above your pay grade. Your job is to check identification and verify deliveries, not to play detective." The captain's response reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of modern security challenges that frustrated Marcus deeply. Effective threat detection required exactly the type of pattern analysis that Marcus was conducting. Terrorist organizations and other hostile actors had learned to exploit security systems that focused only on obvious, immediate threats while ignoring subtle intelligence-gathering activities. Marcus knew from his military training that successful attacks were usually preceded by extended surveillance and intelligence-gathering phases. The attackers who had successfully breached security at various government facilities and diplomatic installations had typically conducted months of careful observation before executing their operations. The palace's security procedures were designed to detect and respond to direct attacks, but provided minimal protection against intelligence-gathering activities. Hostile actors who wanted to study palace security procedures, identify vulnerable areas, or map escape routes could accomplish these objectives through legitimate service provider access without triggering any immediate security responses. Marcus's analysis suggested that such intelligence gathering might already be underway. The patterns he had documented could represent normal variations in service provider operations, but they could also indicate systematic surveillance activities conducted by individuals who understood how to exploit legitimate access opportunities. The institutional resistance to acknowledging these possibilities created a dangerous blind spot in palace security. Marcus understood that false alarms were costly and disruptive, but he also knew that failure to detect genuine preparation for an attack could have catastrophic consequences. Frustrated by his inability to convey these concerns through official channels, Marcus began developing his own enhanced monitoring procedures. During his assigned shifts, he expanded his observations beyond the immediate requirements of his position, tracking patterns and anomalies that might indicate intelligence-gathering activities. He created detailed profiles of all regular service provider personnel, noting their normal behavior patterns, work habits, and areas of apparent interest. He documented any deviations from these established patterns, paying particular attention to new personnel who seemed to be learning the palace layout more thoroughly than their duties required. Marcus also began coordinating informally with palace staff members who had developed trust in his judgment. Maria Santos and James Mitchell started sharing their own observations about service provider personnel whose behavior seemed unusual or concerning. This unofficial intelligence network provided Marcus with information that wouldn't have been available through formal security channels. The network's value became apparent in early November when Maria Santos mentioned that one of the new cleaning staff members had been asking detailed questions about the royal family's daily schedules and movement patterns. The cleaner claimed to be asking because he wanted to avoid interfering with official activities while performing his duties. Marcus interviewed the cleaner casually, pretending to be providing routine orientation information about palace operations. The man's questions were more sophisticated than normal curiosity about work schedules would require. He wanted to know which entrances family members typically used, what times they usually moved between different areas of the palace, and which security procedures governed access to their private quarters. Again, the questions weren't technically inappropriate for a cleaning staff member who wanted to do his job effectively. But their level of detail and focus on security-related topics raised red flags for Marcus, especially given the pattern of similar incidents he had been documenting. Marcus researched the cleaner's background using publicly available information sources. The man's employment history included several positions with different security companies, property management firms, and cleaning services. His work record was legitimate, but showed a pattern of short-term employment with organizations that provided access to high-security facilities. This employment pattern could indicate someone who frequently changed jobs for personal reasons, or it could suggest someone who was systematically gaining experience with security procedures at different types of sensitive facilities. Combined with his unusual interest in palace operations, the background information raised serious concerns about his motivations. Marcus documented his findings thoroughly and requested a meeting with Captain Reynolds to discuss the situation. He presented his analysis of the cleaner's background, behavior, and questions, along with the broader pattern of incidents he had been tracking over the previous months. Captain Reynolds listened with growing irritation. He pointed out that all the service providers Marcus was concerned about had passed standard background checks and were working for legitimate companies with established contracts. He reminded Marcus that asking questions about work schedules and security procedures was normal behavior for conscientious employees who wanted to perform their duties without creating problems. "You're manufacturing threats out of normal workplace behavior," the captain told Marcus. "Your job is to verify identification and monitor access, not to conduct surveillance on legitimate workers. I'm concerned that you're developing an unhealthy level of suspicion about people who are just trying to do their jobs." The captain's response revealed the fundamental challenge Marcus faced in trying to improve palace security. The institutional culture viewed his analytical approach as excessive rather than thorough. His superiors interpreted his pattern recognition and threat assessment activities as evidence of paranoid thinking rather than professional competence. Marcus understood their perspective. False alarms and unfounded suspicions could damage relationships with service providers, create unnecessary anxiety among staff members, and undermine the trust that effective operations required. Security procedures needed to balance protection against potential threats with the practical requirements of running a functioning palace. The problem was that this balance had shifted too far toward trusting normal appearances and dismissing subtle warning signs. Marcus's military experience had taught him that the most dangerous threats were often the ones that appeared normal until the moment they revealed their true nature. Professional intelligence operatives and sophisticated terrorist organizations understood how security systems worked and designed their operations to exploit the assumptions and limitations of those systems. They used legitimate access opportunities, appeared professional and credible, and avoided behavior that would trigger immediate security responses. Detecting these threats required exactly the type of pattern analysis and behavioral assessment that Marcus was conducting. His approach might seem excessive when applied to innocent service providers, but it would be essential for identifying genuine hostile actors who were conducting intelligence gathering or preparation activities. Marcus decided to continue his enhanced monitoring activities regardless of his superiors' disapproval. He viewed his primary responsibility as protecting the royal family, not maintaining comfortable relationships with service providers or avoiding false alarms. He refined his documentation procedures, focusing on objective observations rather than subjective interpretations that might be dismissed as paranoid speculation. He tracked specific behaviors, documented exact conversations, and noted precise timelines that could be verified independently. Marcus also expanded his informal coordination with trusted palace staff members, encouraging them to report any unusual behavior or concerning incidents they observed. He provided them with specific indicators to watch for, based on his knowledge of intelligence gathering techniques and attack preparation methods. This approach created an unofficial early warning system that operated independently of the formal security hierarchy. Marcus understood that he was taking significant professional risks by working outside established channels, but he believed that the potential threat justified these risks. The unofficial system's value became apparent in mid-November when James Mitchell reported that he had observed several different service provider personnel conducting what appeared to be coordinated observations of palace grounds and security procedures. Over the course of a week, Mitchell had noticed a flower delivery driver photographing sight lines from various positions around the palace perimeter. A cleaning company supervisor had spent unusually long periods studying the placement and coverage areas of external security cameras. A maintenance worker had asked detailed questions about the electronic access control systems used for different areas of the building. Each individual incident seemed innocent, but their coordination in time and focus on security-related topics suggested the possibility of systematic intelligence gathering. Mitchell had noticed the pattern because Marcus had trained him to pay attention to such indicators, not because the activities would have been obvious to casual observation. Marcus analyzed Mitchell's reports along with his own observations and Maria Santos's information about internal activities. The combined intelligence suggested that multiple individuals with legitimate access were conducting coordinated surveillance of palace security procedures, both external and internal. By late November, Marcus had accumulated enough evidence to convince himself that organized intelligence gathering was taking place at the palace. The coordination between different service providers, the systematic focus on security procedures, and the timing of various incidents created a pattern that went beyond coincidence. The challenge was convincing his superiors that this threat was real and immediate. Marcus knew that Captain Reynolds had already dismissed his previous concerns as excessive suspicion, and presenting the same type of analysis would likely produce the same dismissive response. Marcus decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of presenting his analysis and conclusions, he would focus on documenting specific behaviors and activities that violated established security protocols, regardless of whether they appeared to be part of a larger pattern. He began conducting more thorough investigations of individual incidents, using techniques he had learned during his military service to verify credentials, check backgrounds, and identify inconsistencies in cover stories. This approach allowed him to build cases against specific individuals based on concrete violations rather than pattern analysis that could be dismissed as speculation. The first opportunity came when Marcus noticed a maintenance worker who claimed to be inspecting electrical systems, but was actually photographing security camera blind spots and testing the responsiveness of motion sensors. The worker's credentials were legitimate, but his activities went beyond the work order he was supposed to be completing. Marcus documented the worker's activities with photographs and time-stamped observations. He verified that the work order didn't authorize the security-related activities the worker was conducting. He interviewed the worker's supervisor and discovered discrepancies between the supervisor's understanding of the assignment and the worker's actual activities. When confronted directly, the worker claimed that he was conducting additional safety inspections as part of his personal initiative to provide excellent service. His explanation was plausible, but Marcus's follow-up investigation revealed that the worker had requested similar assignments at other high-security facilities and had been terminated from a previous position for conducting unauthorized photography of sensitive areas. This background information provided concrete grounds for removing the worker from palace access without relying on pattern analysis or speculation about intelligence-gathering activities. Marcus presented his findings to Captain Reynolds as a straightforward case of an individual who had violated his authorized access and had a history of similar problems at other facilities. Captain Reynolds couldn't dismiss this evidence as easily as he had rejected Marcus's previous concerns. The worker's unauthorized activities were documented photographically. His violation of the work order was verified by his supervisor, and his problematic employment history was a matter of public record. The captain authorized removal of the worker from palace access and directed additional background checks for all maintenance personnel working in sensitive areas. He also commended Marcus for his thorough investigation and attention to detail, though he remained skeptical about whether the incident indicated any broader security concerns. Marcus viewed the captain's response as progress, even though it fell short of acknowledging the systematic threat he believed was developing. Removing one potentially hostile individual from palace access improved security, and demonstrating the value of thorough investigation might make his superiors more receptive to future concerns. The success with the maintenance worker case encouraged Marcus to intensify his investigations of other suspicious individuals. He began allocating more time to background research and verification activities, using his off-duty hours to conduct analysis that couldn't be completed during regular shifts. Marcus's enhanced investigation procedures revealed additional problems that had been missed by standard security screening. Several service provider personnel had provided references from previous employers who didn't actually exist. Others had employment gaps that weren't adequately explained and couldn't be verified through normal channels. Most concerning, Marcus discovered that several individuals with suspicious backgrounds had been assigned to work in areas that provided access to critical security systems and sensitive operational information. These assignments appeared to be the result of poor communication between different departments rather than deliberate placement, but they created significant vulnerabilities regardless of their origin. Marcus compiled this information into formal reports that focused on specific security violations and procedural failures rather than broader threat assessments. He presented each case as an individual problem requiring immediate attention, avoiding the pattern analysis approach that had previously been dismissed. This strategy proved more effective. Captain Reynolds and other supervisors responded positively to reports that identified concrete problems with specific solutions. They were willing to take action against individuals who had falsified credentials or violated their authorized access, even if they remained skeptical about larger security theories. Over a period of 3 weeks, Marcus's investigations resulted in the removal of 6 different service provider personnel from Palace access. Each removal was justified by specific violations of security protocols or problems with background verification, creating a documented pattern of improved security without requiring acknowledgement of systematic intelligence gathering. The removals also had an important deterrent effect. Word spread through the service provider community that Palace Security was conducting more thorough background checks and monitoring activities more carefully. This increased scrutiny made it more difficult for hostile actors to maintain their cover stories and reduced the likelihood that additional intelligence gathering would continue undetected. Marcus noticed that the suspicious behavior patterns he had been tracking decreased significantly after the first few personnel removals. Service providers became more careful about following their authorized procedures and avoiding activities that might attract security attention. The change could indicate that innocent workers were simply being more careful to avoid problems, but Marcus interpreted it as evidence that his countermeasures had disrupted whatever intelligence-gathering operation had been underway. His interpretation was validated in early December when James Mitchell reported that one of the removed maintenance workers had returned to the palace grounds after his access was revoked. The individual was conducting surveillance from public areas outside the palace perimeter, using telephoto photography equipment to document security procedures and personnel movements. This surveillance activity was technically legal since it was being conducted from public property, but it confirmed Marcus's assessment that the removed workers had been gathering intelligence for purposes beyond legitimate maintenance activities. The workers' return also suggested that the intelligence-gathering operation was continuing despite the loss of internal access. Marcus documented the external surveillance activities and reported them through official channels. He also coordinated with local police to increase patrol activities in the areas where the surveillance was taking place, making it more difficult for the observers to operate without detection. The external surveillance evidence finally convinced Captain Reynolds that Marcus's concerns about coordinated intelligence gathering were justified. The captain authorized a comprehensive review of all service provider contracts and personnel, along with enhanced monitoring procedures for areas where contracted workers operated. Captain Reynolds also requested support from specialized counterintelligence personnel who had experience with detecting and disrupting surveillance operations. These specialists reviewed Marcus's documentation and confirmed that the patterns he had identified were consistent with organized intelligence gathering activities. The counterintelligence review revealed additional security vulnerabilities that had been exploited during the intelligence gathering operation. The hostile actors had gained access to detailed information about palace security procedures, personnel schedules, and emergency response protocols. They had also identified several potential attack routes and escape paths that weren't adequately covered by existing security measures. Most alarming, the review suggested that the intelligence gathering operation had been more extensive than Marcus had initially realized. The documented activities represented only the portion that had been detected through his enhanced monitoring procedures. Additional intelligence gathering had likely taken place in areas and through methods that hadn't been observed. The counterintelligence specialists recommended immediate implementation of enhanced security measures to address the vulnerabilities that had been identified. They also suggested conducting threat assessment activities to determine whether the intelligence gathering was being conducted in preparation for a specific attack or as part of broader surveillance activities. These recommendations validated Marcus's analytical approach and demonstrated the value of the pattern recognition techniques his superiors had initially dismissed. The specialists noted that Marcus's documentation had been essential for understanding the scope and methods of the intelligence gathering operation. The recognition was professionally satisfying, but Marcus remained focused on the immediate security implications rather than personal vindication. The intelligence gathered by hostile actors created ongoing vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed quickly and comprehensively. Marcus worked with the counterintelligence specialists to develop enhanced security protocols that would make future intelligence gathering operations more difficult to conduct. These protocols included improved background checking procedures, enhanced monitoring of service provider activities, and better coordination between different security departments. The enhanced protocols also included training for palace staff members who weren't part of the security department, but who could serve as additional sources of intelligence about suspicious activities. Marcus's informal network with Maria Santos, James Mitchell, and other trusted staff members had proven valuable for detecting problems that wouldn't have been visible to security personnel alone. Formalizing this network through official training programs would expand the palace's ability to detect intelligence-gathering activities, while ensuring that staff members understood how to report concerns through proper channels, without compromising ongoing security operations. The training programs also needed to address the challenge of distinguishing between normal curiosity about palace operations and potentially hostile intelligence gathering. Staff members required guidance about which types of questions and behaviors should trigger security attention without becoming suspicious of every visitor or service provider who showed normal interest in their surroundings. Marcus contributed to developing these training materials based on his experience with detecting subtle indicators of problematic behavior. His ability to identify concerning patterns while avoiding false alarms made him valuable for training others to recognize similar threats. The training development process also provided Marcus with opportunities to share his analytical techniques with other security personnel. Several of his colleagues, including some who had previously dismissed his concerns, began requesting guidance about threat detection and pattern recognition methods. Sarah Williams approached Marcus privately to discuss his investigation procedures. She admitted that she had initially viewed his detailed documentation and analytical approach as excessive, but the recent discoveries had convinced her that such thoroughness was necessary for effective security work. "I thought you were being paranoid," she told Marcus during a break between training sessions. "I couldn't understand why you were taking pictures of flower arrangements and documenting conversations with cleaning staff. Now I realize that we missed all these warning signs because we weren't paying attention to details the way you were." Williams's acknowledgement represented a significant shift in how Marcus's colleagues viewed his work. Several other guards began asking him to explain his observation techniques and documentation procedures. They wanted to understand how he had detected patterns that they had completely missed. Marcus was willing to share his knowledge, but he emphasized that effective threat detection required consistent attention to details rather than occasional efforts to look for problems. The intelligence-gathering operation had succeeded initially because it exploited the normal tendency to trust familiar people and situations without conducting ongoing verification. "The hardest part isn't learning to spot suspicious behavior," Marcus explained to a group of colleagues during an informal discussion. The hardest part is maintaining the discipline to document and analyze normal behavior so that you can recognize when something changes. Most of what I recorded seemed completely innocent when I first observed it. The pattern only became visible when I compared activities over time. This explanation helped his colleagues understand why Marcus's approach had been more effective than their own focus on obvious threats. Intelligence-gathering operations were designed to appear normal when observed individually, but revealed their true nature when analyzed systematically over extended periods. Marcus also emphasized the importance of expanding information sources beyond direct security observations. His network of contacts among palace staff members had provided critical intelligence that wouldn't have been available through security personnel alone. "We see people for a few minutes when they enter and exit the building," Marcus pointed out. "The cleaning staff and maintenance workers see them for hours while they're working. They notice behavior patterns and changes that we never observe. We need to treat them as part of our security team, not just as people we monitor." This perspective reflected Marcus's broader understanding of security as a collaborative effort rather than an isolated function performed by specialized personnel. Effective protection required coordination between multiple departments and extensive information sharing to create comprehensive awareness of potential threats. The collaborative approach also needed to extend beyond palace staff to include coordination with external security agencies that had specialized capabilities for detecting and disrupting intelligence-gathering operations. Marcus's investigation had succeeded in identifying the immediate threat, but determining whether it was connected to larger hostile activities required resources and expertise that weren't available within the palace security department. The counterintelligence specialists had initiated investigations to trace the backgrounds of the removed personnel and identify any connections between their activities and known terrorist organizations or hostile intelligence services. These investigations would determine whether the palace had been targeted by a specific group with operational plans or had simply been subjected to opportunistic intelligence gathering by individuals acting independently. The external investigation into the intelligence-gathering operation produced results that exceeded everyone's expectations, including Marcus's. What had initially appeared to be opportunistic surveillance by individuals acting independently proved to be part of a coordinated operation with connections to international terrorist networks. The counterintelligence specialists traced several of the removed personnel to a sophisticated recruitment and placement operation that had been targeting high-security facilities across Western Europe. The operation used legitimate employment agencies and service companies to place operatives in positions that provided access to government buildings, diplomatic facilities, and royal residences. The scope of the operation was staggering. Intelligence agencies in France, Germany, and Belgium had identified similar patterns at their own sensitive facilities, but hadn't realized that the activities were coordinated until the palace investigation provided the missing connections. Marcus's detailed documentation had become crucial evidence in a much larger counterterrorism investigation. Detective Chief Inspector Amanda Walsh from Scotland Yard's Counter-Terrorism Command briefed palace security personnel about the broader investigation. She explained that Marcus's work had blown open an intelligence-gathering network that had been operating undetected for nearly 2 years. "Your guard's documentation was extraordinarily detailed and professional," she told Captain Reynolds during the briefing. "His pattern recognition and analytical approach identified activities that we missed completely in our own facilities. Without his work, this network would still be operating, and we'd be facing serious security vulnerabilities across multiple countries." The praise was professionally gratifying, but Marcus remained focused on the immediate implications for palace security. If the intelligence-gathering operation was connected to active terrorist planning, the royal family remained in potential danger regardless of how many operatives had been identified and removed. DCI Walsh confirmed these concerns. The investigation had disrupted the intelligence-gathering network, but hadn't yet identified the ultimate objectives or timeline of whatever operation was being planned. The gathered intelligence could be used to plan attacks months or years in the future, creating ongoing security concerns that couldn't be resolved simply by removing the known operatives. "We're dealing with a patient, sophisticated adversary," Walsh explained. They spent 2 years gathering intelligence before we detected them. They clearly understand that effective attacks require extensive preparation and careful planning. We have to assume that they've moved into operational planning phases based on the intelligence they collected. This assessment meant that palace security needed to implement comprehensive changes to address all the vulnerabilities that had been identified during the intelligence gathering operation. Simply improving background checking and monitoring procedures wouldn't be sufficient if hostile actors already possessed detailed knowledge of existing security measures. Marcus worked with the counterintelligence specialists and palace security management to develop enhanced protection protocols that assumed potential attackers had extensive knowledge of previous security procedures. These protocols included completely new emergency response procedures, different movement routes for royal family members, and alternative communication systems that wouldn't be compromised if the primary systems were attacked. The enhanced protocols also required significant changes to the physical security infrastructure. Several areas of the palace needed additional surveillance coverage to eliminate blind spots that had been mapped during the intelligence gathering operation. New access control systems were installed to prevent unauthorized entry through routes that had been identified as vulnerable. Most importantly, the protocols included provisions for adapting security procedures continuously to prevent hostile actors from gathering updated intelligence about the changes. Marcus's analytical approach became the model for ongoing threat assessment activities that would detect future intelligence gathering attempts before they could compromise the enhanced security measures. Captain Reynolds assigned Marcus to lead the threat assessment team that would be responsible for implementing these ongoing analytical procedures. The assignment represented a dramatic change in Marcus's status within the palace security organization, but also reflected recognition that his skills were essential for maintaining effective protection. "I owe you an apology," Captain Reynolds told Marcus privately after announcing the assignment. "I dismissed your concerns because they didn't fit into the way we normally think about security threats. Your approach was exactly what we needed, and I was too rigid to recognize it." The apology was appreciated, but Marcus understood that institutional change would require more than individual recognition. The palace security organization needed to develop systematic capabilities for the type of analysis he had been conducting, rather than relying on one person's unusual skills and persistence. Marcus began recruiting and training additional personnel who could contribute to pattern recognition and threat assessment activities. He looked for individuals who had demonstrated analytical thinking, attention to detail, and willingness to question normal assumptions about security threats. Sarah Williams became one of the first members of the expanded threat assessment team. Her request to learn Marcus's investigation techniques had demonstrated the intellectual curiosity and professional dedication that made effective analysts. She also brought different perspectives and experiences that complemented Marcus's military background. "I realized that I'd been thinking about security reactively," Williams explained during one of their coordination meetings. "I was waiting for obvious threats to appear so I could respond to them. Your approach is about detecting threats before they become obvious, which requires a completely different mindset." Williams's comment highlighted one of the fundamental challenges in developing effective threat assessment capabilities. Most security personnel were trained to recognize and respond to immediate dangers, but detecting intelligence gathering and attack preparation required understanding subtle behavioral patterns and long-term activity trends. Training personnel to think analytically rather than reactively required extensive education about intelligence gathering techniques, attack planning methodologies, and pattern recognition principles. Marcus worked with external specialists to develop comprehensive training programs that would prepare security personnel for the types of threats they were likely to encounter. The training programs also needed to address the emotional and psychological challenges of analytical security work. Marcus had discovered that maintaining constant vigilance and suspicion was emotionally exhausting, especially when most of the behaviors being analyzed were ultimately innocent. "You have to accept that 99% of what you investigate will turn out to be normal," Marcus explained to new team members. "The challenge is maintaining the discipline to document and analyze that 99% so that you can identify the 1% that's actually dangerous." This discipline required significant personal commitment from team members who needed to invest substantial time and energy in activities that usually produced negative results. The psychological rewards of analytical work were delayed and uncertain, unlike the immediate satisfaction of responding successfully to obvious threats. Marcus addressed these challenges by emphasizing the importance of prevention in security work. Every threat we detect before it becomes operational potentially saves lives, he told his team. We may never know what attacks we've prevented, but preventing them is much more valuable than responding to them after they've started. The preventive approach also required developing relationships with external agencies that could provide intelligence about emerging threats and attack planning activities. Marcus's work had demonstrated the value of coordination between different security organizations, but maintaining those relationships required ongoing effort and information sharing. DCI Walsh became a regular contact who provided updates about the broader investigation into the intelligence gathering network. Her information helped Marcus understand how the palace-specific intelligence might be used and what types of attack scenarios were most likely based on the gathered information. The intelligence they collected suggests they were planning a complex operation involving multiple attack vectors, Walsh reported during one of their coordination meetings. They mapped escape routes, studied security response procedures, and identified areas where they could cause maximum disruption. This wasn't preliminary surveillance for a simple attack. This assessment reinforced the importance of the comprehensive security changes that had been implemented at the palace. A complex, multi-vector attack would exploit multiple vulnerabilities simultaneously, requiring coordinated defensive measures that could respond to threats from different directions and using different methods. Marcus incorporated this intelligence into ongoing security planning, developing response scenarios for attacks that combined different tactics and approached the palace through multiple routes simultaneously. These scenarios pushed the security team beyond their normal training exercises and forced them to consider threats that were more sophisticated than single attackers or simple assault approaches. The enhanced training exercises revealed additional vulnerabilities in palace security that hadn't been apparent during previous assessments. The security team's ability to coordinate responses to simultaneous threats from multiple directions was limited by communication systems and command structures that were designed for simpler scenarios. Marcus worked with communications specialists to develop backup systems that could maintain coordination even if primary communication networks were jammed or compromised. He also worked with tactical specialists to improve the security team's ability to adapt their responses to unexpected attack methods and changing tactical situations. These improvements required extensive practice and training to implement effectively. Marcus organized regular exercises that tested different aspects of the enhanced security procedures, allowing team members to develop familiarity with new protocols and identify areas that needed further refinement. The exercises also served as opportunities to test Marcus's analytical methods under realistic conditions. Team members practicing threat detection during simulated attacks learned to recognize patterns and behavioral indicators that might be missed during actual operations if they weren't prepared to identify them quickly. The hardest part of threat detection during an actual incident is maintaining analytical thinking while dealing with the stress and adrenaline of a potential emergency, Marcus explained to team members during post-exercise discussions. These practice sessions help you develop the ability to think clearly and observe carefully even when everything seems chaotic. The stress management aspect of analytical work became an increasingly important focus of training activities. Marcus had learned from his military experience that effective decision-making under pressure required extensive preparation and practice, but analytical observation required additional skills that weren't covered in normal tactical training. Marcus developed specialized exercises that combined observation and analysis tasks with high-stress situations, helping team members learn to maintain their analytical capabilities even during simulated emergencies. These exercises revealed that some personnel who were excellent tactical operators struggled with analytical thinking under pressure, while others who were effective analysts had difficulty maintaining their observational skills during stressful situations. Understanding these individual differences allowed Marcus to assign team members to roles that maximized their strengths, while providing additional training to address their weaknesses. The most effective team composition combined personnel with different types of expertise and different stress response patterns. The team development process also revealed the importance of leadership and coordination during complex security situations. Marcus's role had evolved from individual analyst to team coordinator, requiring management and communication skills that went beyond his technical analytical capabilities. Captain Reynolds provided guidance about leadership responsibilities and organizational management, drawing on his extensive experience with supervising security operations. "Your analytical skills got you here," he told Marcus, "but developing other people's analytical skills will determine whether this approach succeeds long-term." This perspective helped Marcus understand that his ultimate objective wasn't just to improve his own threat detection capabilities, but to create institutional knowledge and procedures that would continue to provide effective security, even if he weren't available to conduct analysis personally. Creating sustainable institutional capabilities required documenting analytical procedures, training methods, and decision-making frameworks that could be implemented by other personnel. Marcus began developing comprehensive manuals that explained his threat detection methods and provided guidance for applying them in different situations. The documentation process also forced Marcus to think systematically about his own analytical methods, many of which he had developed intuitively based on his military experience and personal observations. Converting intuitive pattern recognition into systematic procedures that could be taught to others required careful analysis of his own thinking processes. "I realized I was doing things automatically that I couldn't explain to other people," Marcus told Sarah Williams during one of their training development sessions. "Creating training materials forced me to understand exactly what I was looking for and why certain patterns concerned me." The systematic approach to training development also revealed gaps and inconsistencies in Marcus's analytical methods that weren't apparent when he was working alone. Collaborative development of procedures with other team members improved the overall quality of the analytical framework, while ensuring that it could be applied effectively by personnel with different backgrounds and experience levels. The collaborative approach also provided opportunities for other team members to contribute insights and perspectives that enhanced the analytical framework beyond what Marcus could have developed independently. Williams's background in criminal investigation brought different pattern recognition skills, while other team members contributed expertise in behavioral analysis, communications intelligence, and tactical operations. The expanded analytical capabilities that resulted from this collaborative development process exceeded what any individual analyst could have achieved working alone. The team approach also provided redundancy and cross-checking that reduced the likelihood of missing important threats or misinterpreting observed patterns. 6 months after the intelligence-gathering network was disrupted, the palace had transformed into one of the most analytically sophisticated security environments in Europe. Marcus's threat assessment team had become the model for similar units at other royal residences and government facilities, with requests for training and consultation arriving regularly from international partners. The transformation wasn't just organizational, but cultural. The dismissive attitude toward detailed analysis that had characterized palace security before Marcus's discoveries had been replaced by an institutional commitment to systematic threat assessment and pattern recognition. Guards who had once mocked Marcus's meticulous documentation now carried their own observation notebooks and competed to identify subtle security concerns before they developed into larger problems. Detective Sergeant Morrison, who had been Marcus's most persistent tormentor, approached him after a training session to discuss his own analytical observations. "I've been watching the delivery patterns you taught us to monitor," Morrison told him. "I think there might be something worth investigating with the catering company that handles special events." Morrison's transformation was particularly significant because his previous skepticism had been based on genuine professional experience rather than mere prejudice. His conversion to analytical thinking demonstrated that Marcus's methods could be adopted successfully by personnel with very different backgrounds and perspectives. "What did you notice?" Marcus asked, genuinely interested in Morrison's observations. The question would have been unimaginable a year earlier when Morrison's opinions about security matters were dismissed as thoroughly as Marcus's own concerns had been. Morrison explained that he had noticed unusual coordination between different catering staff members during recent events. The staff appeared to be conducting systematic observations of guest security procedures and VIP movement patterns, but their activities were subtle enough to avoid detection by anyone not specifically trained in pattern recognition. They're legitimate catering staff, Morrison clarified, but their behavior suggests they're gathering intelligence beyond what they need for food service. The patterns you taught us to recognize are there, but I wouldn't have seen them without the training. Marcus reviewed Morrison's documentation and agreed that the observations warranted investigation. The catering company had been providing services for royal events for over 5 years with an excellent reputation and no previous security concerns, but Morrison's analysis suggested that recent personnel changes might have introduced hostile elements into their organization. The investigation revealed that Morrison's suspicions were justified. 3 recently hired catering staff members had connections to individuals who had been identified during the original intelligence gathering investigation. They weren't directly involved in terrorist activities, but appeared to be part of a network that was attempting to rebuild intelligence gathering capabilities using different methods and access points. The discovery validated the importance of maintaining continuous analytical vigilance, rather than assuming that disrupting one intelligence gathering network would eliminate ongoing threats. Hostile actors had adapted to the enhanced security measures by shifting to different operational approaches that exploited the continued need for legitimate service providers. Marcus coordinated with DCI Walsh to ensure that the new intelligence gathering attempt was thoroughly investigated and disrupted. The investigation revealed that similar networks were attempting to reestablish surveillance capabilities at other high-security facilities across Europe, using lessons learned from the previous operations exposure. They're more careful now, Walsh explained during a briefing about the expanded investigation. They're using more sophisticated cover stories, better credential verification, and longer development periods before attempting to gather sensitive information. Your analytical methods are still effective, but they require even more systematic application. The evolution of hostile tactics reinforced the importance of continuous development and refinement of analytical capabilities. Marcus's team needed to stay ahead of adversaries who were learning from previous exposure and adapting their methods to exploit new vulnerabilities. Marcus began collaborating with academic researchers and intelligence specialists to develop more sophisticated analytical frameworks that could detect increasingly subtle intelligence gathering activities. These frameworks incorporated advances in behavioral analysis, pattern recognition technology, and predictive modeling that went beyond the observational methods he had originally developed. The academic collaboration also provided opportunities to share palace security experiences with researchers who were studying similar threats at other types of facilities. Marcus discovered that his analytical methods were applicable to protecting corporate facilities, diplomatic installations, and other high-value targets that faced similar intelligence-gathering threats. The broader applicability of his work led to invitations to speak at security conferences and contribute to professional publications about threat assessment methodologies. Marcus found these opportunities valuable for learning about new threats and countermeasures that were being developed by other security organizations. The professional recognition also created opportunities for career advancement that Marcus hadn't previously considered. Several private security companies and government agencies offered positions that would have provided significantly higher compensation and more prestigious assignments than his palace role. Marcus declined these opportunities because he felt a personal commitment to protecting the royal family and had developed strong working relationships with his current team members. He also recognized that the palace environment provided unique opportunities to develop and test analytical methods under controlled conditions with extensive resources and institutional support. "I could make more money somewhere else," Marcus told Sarah Williams when she asked about his decision to remain at the palace. "But I couldn't find a better laboratory for developing threat assessment capabilities or a more important mission than protecting people who represent constitutional democracy." Williams understood his perspective, because she had received similar offers and made similar decisions to remain with the palace security team. The Threat Assessment Unit had developed a strong sense of mission and professional identity that made it difficult for members to consider other opportunities. The team's cohesion was tested when they detected what appeared to be preparation for an actual attack, rather than just intelligence-gathering activities. Marcus's analytical framework had identified patterns that suggested hostile actors were moving beyond surveillance into operational planning phases. The indicators were subtle but unmistakable to analysts trained in Marcus's methods. Service provider personnel were asking questions about specific dates and times when royal family members would be attending public events. Delivery schedules were being modified to provide access during periods when security attention would be focused on event preparations. Maintenance activities were being requested in areas that would provide excellent vantage points for surveillance or attack positions. Marcus documented these patterns and presented his analysis to Captain Reynolds and DCI Walsh during an emergency briefing. His assessment was that hostile actors were preparing to conduct an attack during an upcoming state dinner that would bring together multiple members of the royal family with international dignitaries. The intelligence gathering phase is complete, Marcus explained to the briefing participants. They know our security procedures, our response capabilities, and our vulnerabilities. Now they're positioning themselves to exploit that knowledge during a high-value target opportunity. DCI Walsh agreed with Marcus's assessment and immediately initiated enhanced security measures for the planned event. Additional security personnel were assigned, alternative venues were prepared, and emergency response procedures were updated to address the specific threats that Marcus had identified. The enhanced security measures were implemented discreetly to avoid alerting hostile actors that their preparations had been detected. Marcus's team continued monitoring the suspected operatives, while additional surveillance was conducted by specialized counterterrorism units. The monitoring revealed that Marcus's analysis had been accurate. The suspected operatives were indeed preparing for an attack during the state dinner, using intelligence gathered during their previous surveillance activities to plan a complex operation involving multiple attack vectors and coordinated timing. The attack plan was sophisticated and would have been extremely difficult to counter using traditional security measures. The attackers had identified ways to exploit the palace's emergency response procedures, communication systems, and evacuation routes to maximize casualties and minimize the possibility of effective defensive responses. Marcus's early detection of the preparation activities provided time to develop comprehensive countermeasures that addressed each aspect of the planned attack. The state dinner proceeded as scheduled, but with security measures that neutralized the specific threats without creating obvious changes that would have alerted the attackers. The success of the operation was measured not by dramatic confrontations or arrests, but by the complete absence of any security incidents during the event. The attackers, unaware that their plans had been detected and countered, attempted to execute their operation, but found that their intelligence was no longer accurate and their planned approaches were effectively blocked. The failed attack attempt led to the arrest of 12 individuals who were connected to international terrorist networks. The investigation that followed revealed the scope and sophistication of the threat that Marcus's analytical work had helped to prevent. This was one of the most sophisticated attack plots we've encountered, DCI Walsh told Marcus during the post-operation briefing. Your early detection gave us time to develop countermeasures that saved lives without compromising ongoing intelligence operations. The analytical framework you've developed is now being implemented at every major security facility in the country. The professional recognition was gratifying, but Marcus remained focused on the ongoing challenges of maintaining effective security in an environment where hostile actors were continuously adapting their methods and developing new approaches. The success against the state dinner attack had demonstrated the value of analytical threat assessment, but it had also revealed areas where the current methods needed further development. The attackers had been more sophisticated than previous adversaries, requiring enhanced analytical techniques and better integration between different security agencies. Marcus began working with international partners to develop more comprehensive analytical frameworks that could detect and counter increasingly sophisticated threats. This work involved collaboration with security agencies in multiple countries, academic researchers specializing in threat assessment, and technology companies developing advanced surveillance and analysis capabilities. The international collaboration revealed that the threats facing the palace were part of larger patterns affecting high-security facilities worldwide. Terrorist organizations and hostile intelligence services were developing increasingly sophisticated methods for conducting surveillance and attack preparation activities that were difficult to detect using traditional security approaches. Marcus's analytical methods were being adapted and implemented by partner organizations, but the global scope of the threat required systematic coordination between multiple agencies and countries. No single security organization could maintain comprehensive awareness of all the threats and attack methods being developed by hostile actors. The coordination challenge led to the establishment of an international threat assessment network that shared information about suspicious patterns, emerging attack methods, and effective countermeasures. Marcus became the palace's representative to this network, providing expertise about analytical methods while gaining access to intelligence about threats from other environments. The network's collaborative approach proved valuable for detecting threats that crossed national boundaries and involved coordination between different terrorist organizations. Marcus's experience with pattern recognition and systematic analysis made him an effective contributor to international threat assessment activities. As Marcus's reputation grew within the international security community, he received increasing requests to provide training and consultation services to other organizations. These requests represented opportunities to expand the impact of his analytical methods while learning about threats and countermeasures being developed in different environments. Marcus accepted selected consulting opportunities that complemented his palace responsibilities and contributed to the broader development of threat assessment capabilities. He viewed this work as an extension of his mission to protect the royal family, since improving global security ultimately reduced the threats facing all high-value targets. The consulting work also provided opportunities to test and refine his analytical methods in different environments with varying threat profiles and security constraints. Each new application revealed ways to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of pattern recognition and threat detection procedures. After 2 years of leading the palace threat assessment team, Marcus had transformed from the mocked guard who was too small and too suspicious to the internationally recognized expert whose methods were protecting high-value targets worldwide. The transformation wasn't just personal, but represented a fundamental change in how security professionals approached threat detection and prevention. The analytical approach that Marcus had developed through careful observation, systematic documentation, and pattern recognition had become the standard for modern threat assessment. His work demonstrated that preventing attacks required understanding how hostile actors conducted intelligence gathering and attack preparation, not just responding to obvious threats after they materialized. Marcus continued to carry his observation notebook and maintain the meticulous documentation habits that had made his initial discoveries possible. Despite his elevated position and international recognition, he understood that effective threat assessment required attention to details that others might consider insignificant. The moment we stop paying attention to small anomalies is the moment we become vulnerable again, Marcus reminded his team during their regular briefings. Our success isn't measured by the threats we've detected, but by the attacks that never happen because potential adversaries know we're watching carefully. This perspective kept Marcus and his team focused on the continuous vigilance that effective security required. The recognition and success they had achieved were the result of persistent attention to details that others ignored, and maintaining that attention was essential for continuing to prevent threats that were constantly evolving and adapting to security countermeasures. Marcus had proved through precision, dedication, and analytical thinking that effective security work required much more than impressive physical presence or dramatic responses to obvious threats. His story demonstrated that the most important victories in security work were often the ones that remained invisible, preventing attacks that never materialized and protecting people who never knew they had been in danger.